Hi, today I'm going to talk to you about computer systems and in particular the hardware that we find inside a computer system. Now what do we mean by the hardware? The hardware are the things that you can touch and feel about a computer. Okay, so we're going to talk about basically, just excuse me for a minute, we're going to talk about what you will find inside this. Now I'm going to show you examples of things that you will find inside a desktop PC. But what we talk about today would actually apply to your mobile phone, your tablet, your laptop. So we're going to start by drawing a box. And the box I draw on the screen, on the board here, this represents my computer system. So in essence, everything inside this box is what we find inside this box. Now just to clear things up before we start, one of the things that you need to be familiar with is inside this box you'll find a motherboard. Right. Now the motherboard is just a large circuit board that everything connects to. Okay. It doesn't do anything for us apart from connect everything together. So the motherboard, when I talk about plugging things into our computer system, we're talking about plugging things into our motherboard. So the first thing we do when we build a computer system is we install the motherboard. The next thing we do is we start with probably the most important component of your computer system, and this is it. Now it's very, very small, a bit closer to the camera. Okay, it's very, very small, but this is a CPU. And I'm going to draw that here on my diagram. This is a CPU. Now CPU stands for Central Processing Unit. And basically this is the brain of your computer. This small piece of metal, silicon, okay, is basically what carries out all of those instructions, that does everything that you need it to do. And so that's a really, really important component of your computer system. Okay, now it's very small, but it gets really, really hot. So if you were to take apart your own computer system, you'll probably find one of these. Now this is a heatsink. This is a large piece of metal that's designed to carry the heat away from this central processing unit. Now on top of that heatsink like this, you'll probably also find a fan designed to bring in air to carry the heat away from the heatsink. So those two components are very important to ensure that your CPU runs correctly. Okay, now the next part is also essential. Now I like to compare a computer to a human. Right? So I think about when I'm doing my maths. Right? And I love to do long multiplication. Okay? I'm sure you must have done long multiplication before. And when I do long multiplication, I can't write it down. When I do long multiplication, I write down the sum that I've got to do. Okay? And what I need to do is I work out what 4 times 832 is. Then I work out what 40 times 832 is, then I work out what 600 times 832 is, and then I add those three together. Now to do that, I need to write them down. I need to temporarily store 600 times 832, 40 times 832, and 4 times 832. So I need to store those somewhere. Now, as a human, what I do is I write it down. I'm using a whiteboard in this particular instance as a way to temporarily store data. Now, the computer is exactly the same. It needs a place where it can temporarily store data, where it can make notes, where it can store things for later on. And that's what this is for. Okay, so this component is called RAM. Right, and I'm going to put my RAM, okay, and this is really, really important because it's used to temporarily store data. Now, RAM stands for Random Access Memory. Now why it's called random access memory is for something that you can find out in your own time. Okay, so RAM, really, really important to temporarily store data. Sometimes, and in some books, you will find it called main memory. Okay, so it's important that you realize that RAM and main memory are the same thing. Okay, now I haven't got an example here, but there is another type of memory, but it's different from RAM. Okay, this type of memory you'll find built onto the motherboard, and it's called ROM. Okay, now ROM stands for read-only memory, and ROM's job is to store the instructions that tell the computer what to do when you turn it on. Do you ever wonder how your computer knows what to do when you press the power button? Well, why it does what it does are because those instructions that are stored in the ROM. Now together, and this is really, really important to remember, so I'm going to draw a box around them. Together, these two are known, okay, so it's really, really important to remember this, as primary memory. So together, RAM and ROM are known as primary memory. And you can't have a computer system without some form of primary memory and some form of processing unit, some brain. Okay, now, actually, if we were to take this and we were to plug it in, if this was actual computer system that we built, the computer would boot up and we'd be able to, and it would work. All right? But we'd be missing some essential objects. So, for example, we would be missing some way to interact with the device. Okay, so one way that we interact with the device is by inputting data into it. So what other thing we find on the motherboard again is an input controller. Okay, so this is my input controller. Now, an input controller on the motherboard is used to connect input devices. Okay, so I can connect my input device to my input controller. Now, what kinds of devices might I connect to my input controller? Well, for example, a keyboard is a great example of an input device and allows me to input data into my computer system. Now, if I want to interact with my computer system, I don't just need to input data. I also need to see what it's done for me. There's no point in inputting some data, the CPU doing something to it, and then not being able to see what it's done. Okay, so there needs to be some way for me to see what the computer is doing. So we use an output controller. Okay, and again, there are lots of different output devices. In this case though, I'm going to connect a monitor to my computer system. Okay, now again, I can plug all this up and I can interact with my system now, and my system, sorry about that, and my system would work fine. I'll be able to interact with it, I can get it to do what I want it to do, everything is good. Apart from the fact that I need to provide it with some instructions, I need to tell it what I want it to do. Okay, now the way I provide a computer with instructions is by adding software. Right, I've got the hardware, the physical things I can touch, but now I need to add some software. Now I can't see the software, it's just instructions that tell the computer what to do. Right, now the software needs to be stored somewhere. Okay, now you're right, I could store it in the RAM, but the problem with storing it in the RAM is something that we've already discussed. This is only used to temporarily store data. When I turn the computer off, this forgets everything that it was stored. So I need some way to permanently store my data. So I'm going to add one more controller to my diagram. Okay, and I'm going to add an I/O controller. Right, now I'll leave it for you to work out why it's an I/O controller. But for my I/O controller, I'm going to draw two arrows. And then I'm going to draw a box. And I'm going to connect one of these. Okay, now this is obviously for a desktop, but it's quite too large for a laptop. But this is a hard disk drive. You find these in desktops and laptops, so the laptops ones are about half the size. All right? This is a hard disk drive, and it's used to permanently store data. This one, in fact, permanently stores about 80 gigabytes of data, so it's not a very good one, it's a bit old. So, to my computer system, I'm going to connect a hard disk drive. Now, we've got these controllers here. Why don't we connect these directly to the computer system? Well, these controllers allow me to change what I want to connect. So if I decide that I want to add a microphone as an input device, I can connect that to my input controller. If I decide I want to add a scanner, I can connect that to my input controller. The same with my output controller. controller. I've got a monitor, but I may want to add a printer, or I may want to add some speakers. And it's the same for my I/O controller. Okay, I've got a hard disk drive here, but I may also want to add a CD drive, a Blu-ray drive, a DVD drive, some kind of optical drive, or I might want to investigate an SSD drive and get a high-speed storage device. Okay, so this is our computer system. Hopefully, I've taken you through that, and that's a useful exercise for you.